Why do interest rates change government borrowing? Imagine the government as a person who needs to borrow money to pay for things like roads, schools, and hospitals. Just like when you borrow money from a friend or a bank, the government has to pay interest. But what makes the interest rate go up or down? That's what we're here to find out. Interest rates are the cost of borrowing money. When the government borrows money, it sells something called treasury securities. These are like IOU notes that investors buy, promising to get paid back later with interest. These securities can last from a few weeks to 30 years. The government pays interest to the investors during this time. Interest rates are influenced by what the Federal Reserve, or the Fed, does. When the Fed raises short-term interest rates, it costs the government more to borrow money for short periods. This is because the interest on new short-term securities will be higher. For long-term securities, the interest rates depend more on what investors expect about the economy and inflation. If people think prices will rise a lot, interest rates tend to be higher. The amount of debt the government already has also matters. If most of the debt is short-term, then rising interest rates will quickly make borrowing more expensive because the government has to refinance that debt at the new, higher rates. But if most of the debt is long-term, it takes longer for changes in interest rates to affect how much the government pays. When interest rates go up, the government has to spend more money just to pay the interest on its debt. This means less money is left for other things like schools, hospitals, or fixing roads. Recently, because the government borrowed more money and interest rates increased, the amount spent on interest payments has gone up sharply. Higher interest rates can also influence how the government borrows in the future. If borrowing becomes more expensive, the government might decide to borrow less or issue more long-term debt to lock in current lower rates. When interest rates fall, borrowing becomes cheaper, so the government might borrow more or refinance old debt at lower costs. Changes in how much the government pays in interest can also affect the overall economy. When the government spends more on interest, it has less money for other programs, which can slow down economic growth. Plus, if investors see the government borrowing a lot, they might want higher interest rates to compensate for the risk of lending money. So, interest rates change government borrowing because they directly affect how much it costs to issue new debt and refinance old debt. The mix of short-term and long-term debt and what people expect about the economy all play a part. When interest rates rise, borrowing costs go up, leading to higher interest payments and possibly less money for other priorities. When rates fall, borrowing gets cheaper, encouraging more government borrowing and spending.